The state banquet was designed to display unity, dignity, and royal control. Instead, one chair became the center of a silent rebellion. The moment Meghan took the prominent seat reserved beside the senior royals, Princess Anne's expression hardened. She pushed back her chair, rose without offering an explanation, and walked out as the entire banquet hall fell into stunned, breathless silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne did not hesitate. Her chair scraped back before the first formal toast, and the sound cut through the room more sharply than any accusation could have done. A state banquet is one of the crown's most controlled ceremonies, a formal dinner where seating shows rank, duty, trust, and closeness to the monarch. Nothing is meant to happen by accident. That was why her departure felt less like anger and more like a public warning. Meghan remained seated. Conversations stopped, glasses hovered above the table, and every nearby guest seemed to understand that the center position had become dangerous. She felt the judgment moving around her, yet she refused to rise. Leaving the chair would suggest that she had taken something that was never hers. Staying, however, made her look as though she was challenging Anne in front of the entire royal household. Charles watched the doorway close behind his sister. An aide approached, placed a folded note beside him, and stepped away without speaking. The king opened it, read the message once, then lowered his eyes. He did not call Anne back. He did not ask Meghan to move. His silence suggested that the disputed seat was tied to a decision he already understood. A senior courtier then noticed the place card. The name had been printed on cleaner, brighter paper than the cards surrounding it, and its lettering did not match the original seating plan prepared earlier that day. Someone had replaced it shortly before the banquet began. The discovery changed everything, because Meghan's position might not have been a personal demand at all. It might have been a deliberate move by someone powerful enough to alter royal protocol without warning. William reached toward the card while the guests struggled to continue. He turned it over carefully and found a small handwritten mark on the back. The future king recognized it immediately. It belonged to someone with access to the monarch, the banquet arrangements, and the authority to reshape the evening in seconds. But before anyone could understand why Anne had walked away, they first had to confront what that chair represented, and why Meghan was prepared to remain seated while the royal family fractured around her. This was never merely a dispute over where one person sat. For Anne, the chair represented decades of service without complaint. For Meghan, it represented recognition she believed had been deliberately denied. And for Catherine, seated only a few places away, it became a test of whether silence could protect the monarchy, or whether silence had already allowed resentment to become something far more dangerous. Anne reached the private corridor before her control began to crack. She pressed one hand against a narrow table and stood in silence, forcing herself to breathe through the anger. The Princess Royal, a title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had built her entire public life around discipline, duty, and reliability. She attended difficult engagements, accepted little praise, and rarely allowed personal feeling to interfere with royal responsibility. Walking out was the opposite of everything she had trained herself to do, and that contradiction hurt more than the insult itself. Meghan remained in the center seat as the room quietly judged her. For someone no longer serving as a working royal, the position carried enormous meaning because it placed her among those who officially represent the crown. She understood that moving would look like surrender, yet staying made every frozen expression around her feel sharper. What appeared to be recognition was rapidly becoming humiliation. Catherine watched without speaking, but sympathy and suspicion pulled her in opposite directions. She could see the strain in Meghan's face and understood the cruelty of being isolated before an entire room. Still, the princess feared that the changed arrangement had pushed her own future role aside. The seat was not only close to the monarch, it was a public symbol of influence, and symbols inside the royal family were rarely accidental. William leaned closer once the first shock had passed. In a private conversation recorded earlier that day by a trusted aide, Anne had warned him that she would not remain if the approved seating order was secretly changed. The future king now repeated that warning to Catherine in a low voice. His aunt had not reacted suddenly. She had known this challenge might come. Meghan, however, had entered with a different truth. A message delivered by an unnamed advisor shortly before the banquet assured her that the center position had been approved at the highest level. She believed the decision carried the king's protection. That belief gave her the confidence to sit down, and the courage to remain there after Anne left. Catherine finally understood the danger. Two women were acting with complete conviction, yet both had been given different versions of the same decision. Neither believed she was attacking the monarchy. Each believed she was defending her rightful place within it. The banquet exposed the wound, but it did not create it. The real break had occurred weeks earlier, during a private ceremony where one request turned royal tension into a point of no return. Weeks before the banquet, the royal family gathered for a small Windsor ceremony, closed to cameras and public attention. What happened there lasted less than 5 minutes, yet it changed everything. Meghan made a direct request concerning her place beside the senior royals. Anne answered with one uncompromising sentence. From that moment forward, neither woman was willing to retreat without losing something deeply personal. Meghan waited until the private Windsor reception had nearly ended before making her request. The gathering honored long-serving royal charities, and the final commemorative portrait was meant to record the family members who officially carried out duties for the crown. A central position in that grouping was not simply a better place in a photograph. It signaled active status, public trust, and recognized responsibility within the monarchy. Anne listened without interrupting. Then she answered with the same calm discipline that had defined her public life. Family affection, she said, could not automatically restore a role built on service. Meghan heard something colder. To her, the words did not sound like an explanation of duty. They sounded like a warning that she could be welcomed into the room while still being kept outside the family's true center. Meghan left the exchange with her expression controlled, but the restraint broke once she found Harry alone. According to a documented account prepared by a senior household aide, she told him she would no longer accept invitations designed to display reconciliation while placing her at the edge whenever rank became visible. Harry understood why the moment mattered. Each public position shaped how the world judged her place in the family, and another quiet exclusion would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. Anne remained unsettled too. She believed she had defended a boundary that protected every working royal who carried the burden of public duty. Yet she also knew Meghan would see that boundary as punishment. Neither woman had raised her voice, but both had walked away feeling deeply wronged. Charles entered moments later and sensed the tension immediately. The king did not reverse Anne's position, nor did he reject Meghan's concern. Instead, as recorded in the same household account, he promised that she would receive appropriate dignity at the next major royal occasion. The phrase sounded reassuring, but it was dangerously unclear. An aide later treated those words as permission to move Meghan closer to the center at the state banquet. Anne understood them only as a promise of courtesy, not restored rank. One sentence had now created two entirely different expectations. Days before the banquet, Anne learned that the seating plan might have been altered. She requested a private meeting at once. This time, Meghan agreed to face her directly. With both women convinced that principle was on their side, the disputed chair became unavoidable, and the private confrontation before dinner would determine whether either of them entered the hall willing to compromise. Behind a closed drawing room door, with no cameras and no family members standing between them, Anne and Meghan finally spoke directly. There were no raised voices at first. There was no dramatic accusation. Yet every carefully chosen sentence carried years of frustration. When Meghan insisted that the center seat had been authorized, Anne gave an answer so final that the banquet walkout suddenly became inevitable. Anne moved first. Less than an hour remained before the banquet, and she wanted one answer before either of them entered the hall. Had Meghan personally asked for the altered seat, or had she simply accepted a decision made by someone else? A state banquet seating plan is the official arrangement showing where each guest sits and what that position signals about rank, trust, and public duty. Changing it at the last moment could never be dismissed as a harmless adjustment. Meghan held her ground. She said the placement had been presented as a gesture of reconciliation, and refusing it would make her appear to reject the king's attempt to reunite the family. Charles had spent months trying to soften the public image of division, so the seat carried more than comfort or visibility. It was meant to prove that the distance between them had finally begun to close. Anne heard only contradiction. She accused Meghan of accepting the symbolism of royal status without carrying the daily duties attached to it. Meghan answered with equal force, saying the family repeatedly used protocol to hide exclusion, and then blamed her whenever she challenged it. Neither woman shouted. That made the exchange more dangerous, because every word landed with cold precision. Anne placed the printed plan on the table between them. Meghan did not reach for it. The Princess Royal looked directly at her and said, "If you sit in that position, I will not sit beside you." The sentence was not a threat made in anger. It was a decision. Meghan then revealed, through a recorded conversation, later preserved by a household aide, that the instruction had come through the king's private office rather than her own advisors. Anne's certainty shifted for the first time. The dispute might not have begun with Meghan at all. It might have been created inside the palace by someone using the monarch's authority without explaining the consequences. Anne studied the revised plan again and noticed a handwritten initial near the center placement. She recognized it as belonging to a senior official who rarely acted without direct verbal approval from Charles. That mark changed the conflict completely, but it did not change her decision. Meghan entered the banquet determined to take the seat. Anne followed, knowing exactly what she would do the moment that happened. Yet even after the confrontation, one question remained more dangerous than the walkout itself. Who had authorized the seating change? And what outcome had that person intended to provoke? The place card did not move itself. Somewhere inside the palace, a decision had been made to place Meghan at the center of a table already burdened by rivalry, history, and rank. The alteration required access, authority, and confidence that no one would challenge it. But as Charles sat beneath the weight of the banquet, his reaction suggested that the decision had escaped his control. Charles opened the folded note and read the confirmation of Anne's departure in silence. Royal seating plans passed through several layers of approval, including household officials, diplomatic planners, security teams, and the monarch's private office, the small group that manages the king's personal decisions and official instructions. A last-minute change could not happen casually. Someone senior had intervened, and the monarch understood that the consequences were now unfolding in front of foreign guests. William watched his father place the note beside an untouched glass. The prince knew the center seat carried political meaning because official photographs, formal introductions, and broadcast coverage would present whoever occupied it as part of the monarchy's inner circle. Meghan had not simply been moved closer. She had been publicly placed inside a structure of rank she no longer officially served. William leaned toward the king and asked the question no one else dared to raise. Had he approved that exact chair, or had he only asked for Meghan to be treated generously? Charles hesitated. Then he admitted that he had authorized a visible gesture of reconciliation, not the direct removal of established protocol. His attempt to offer dignity had been turned into something far more dangerous. Charles felt the weight of that mistake immediately. Anne had been humiliated into making a public protest, while Meghan had been placed in a position that looked like a deliberate challenge. The king had wanted unity. Instead, two women were now carrying the pain of a decision neither had fully controlled. William turned the card over again and studied the handwritten mark. A documented palace record identified it as the initial of a senior private secretary, an official responsible for turning royal wishes into practical action. The secretary had interpreted the monarch's vague instruction aggressively, believing a dramatic seating gesture would force the family to display harmony whether the feeling existed or not. A recorded planning conversation exposed the deeper truth. The official knew Anne had objected to any alteration, but assumed duty would keep her seated and silent. Her walkout shattered that calculation in seconds. What had been designed as a controlled symbol of reconciliation had become proof of manipulation. William ordered both the original and revised seating plans secured before either could disappear. Yet another crisis was already forming. Meghan now realized that her supposed return to the center might never have been an honor at all. It might have been an experiment. As the truth behind the chair began to emerge, the Banquet's carefully maintained calm collapsed, leaving Meghan, Anne, and Charles to face consequences none of them had intended. The orchestra continued. The courses arrived. Toasts were delivered beneath glittering chandeliers. Yet the banquet had already failed. Anne's empty chair became impossible to ignore, and Meghan's center seat no longer resembled a victory. It looked like a trap. Around them, royal smiles remained fixed, while private loyalties shifted. One glance and one whispered instruction at a time. Palace staff closed the doors and urged everyone to continue, as though nothing had happened. A state banquet is a formal dinner, held by the monarch for important guests, and every movement inside it is meant to project control. Officials hoped Anne's absence could later be explained as illness or a private emergency, but diplomatic guests were already asking questions, and photographers had captured the empty space beside Meghan before anyone could rearrange the table. Meghan felt the truth land hard. A quiet message confirmed that Charles had never chosen her exact chair. The king had approved only a broad gesture of welcome, not the specific placement that now made her look like the cause of Anne's departure. Her confidence turned into anger. She had entered believing she was protected by royal authority. Now she understood that she had been exposed as the aggressor in a decision she did not fully control. Anne sat alone in a smaller palace room, still wearing her formal decorations. The medals and insignia represented years of service, and that made her isolation more painful. An aide asked whether she wished to return before the next toast. She answered no. Then she removed one glove slowly, as if the simple act carried the weight of everything she had just risked. Harry leaned toward Meghan and spoke under his breath. Leaving immediately, he warned, would allow critics to claim she had accepted guilt. Staying could make her appear defiant. According to a recorded account later preserved by a household official, he told her that every possible choice had been turned against her. She looked toward the empty chair and realized he was right. William received another message minutes later. The revised seating plan had been distributed so late that Anne's office had no time to object through proper channels. That timing mattered, because royal disputes are normally corrected quietly before guests arrive. Someone had removed the chance for compromise and forced the confrontation into public view. Catherine then asked to see Anne alone once the guests departed. Meghan heard about the request and made one of her own. She wanted to enter that room too, without Charles, William, Harry, or any palace official speaking for her. The public ceremony had produced only humiliation, but the night's most important moment would happen after the doors closed, when two women finally faced each other without protocol protecting either of them. Long after the final guests departed, Anne and Meghan entered the same private room, with no aides, no advisors, and no men from the royal family speaking on their behalf. The disputed chair was gone. So were the formal titles that had sharpened every exchange. For the first time that night, each woman had to confront not what the monarchy expected, but what her own choices had caused. Meghan had requested the meeting herself. Anne agreed only after Catherine urged her to listen directly, rather than allow palace officials to shape another version of the truth. That mattered, because every message passed through the institution had already deepened the damage. A private royal meeting is simply a conversation held away from formal staff and public record. And this time, neither woman wanted another interpreter standing between them. Meghan spoke first. She explained that she accepted the center seat because she believed Charles had offered it as a real sign of reconciliation. The king's approval, as it had been described to her, suggested that the family was finally ready to acknowledge her without placing her at the edge. Refusing the chair would have felt like rejecting the peace she had waited years to receive. Anne did not excuse her walkout. She said her anger had been directed at the corruption of protocol, not at Meghan's right to be treated with dignity. Yet she admitted something harder. By leaving the hall, she had made the woman still seated there carry the shame of a decision created by others. The protest had exposed the manipulation, but it had also wounded the wrong person. Meghan lowered her guard in return. She confessed that pride had kept her seated after the room turned cold. Moving would have reopened every moment when she felt judged, temporary, or publicly diminished. She knew remaining there looked defiant, but surrendering the chair felt like accepting that she never belonged. Anne placed the late-issued seating plan on the table and pointed to the handwritten initial. A documented account, later preserved by Catherine, recorded the moment both women recognized the same truth. Their anger had been pushed toward each other, while the official responsible remained outside the room, protected by rank and silence. Meghan slid her place card across the table. She said she would not defend the altered arrangement. Anne did not apologize for walking out, but she promised to state clearly that Meghan had not forced her from the banquet. Their agreement was fragile, not warm. Still, it left Charles with nowhere to hide. By morning, the palace would have to protect the official, blame Meghan, or admit that royal authority had created the crisis. The private truth had finally been spoken. But unless the palace accepted responsibility in public, Anne's walkout would continue to divide the family and define Meghan's return. By sunrise, one photograph had traveled across the world. Meghan seated at the center of the state banquet, Anne's chair abandoned beside her, and Charles staring downward as though the crown itself had become too heavy to lift. The image required no explanation. It captured distance, defiance, and regret in a single frame, and forced the palace to answer before silence became its official verdict. Charles entered the first communications meeting before dawn, and found advisors already surrounded by photographs, guest accounts, broadcast clips, and competing explanations. The palace communications team, the group responsible for managing official statements and public messaging, had one task: stop confusion from becoming accepted truth. But the monarchy faced two dangerous choices. It could allow Meghan to carry blame for a seating change she had not ordered, or admit that the king's own household had mishandled a symbolic attempt at reconciliation. Charles listened as one advisor suggested describing Anne's departure as a sudden health concern. The king rejected it immediately. He would not ask his sister to accept a false explanation in order to shield officials who had acted carelessly. Anne had already risked her reputation by walking out. Forcing her to hide the reason would turn a palace mistake into a personal betrayal. Meghan watched the morning coverage beside Harry. One commentator said she had seized the center seat, while another described the moment as a deliberate challenge to Anne's rank. She switched off the television before the discussion ended. Harry remained close, but neither could ignore the danger. Every hour of palace silence allowed invention to harden into memory, and once the public accepted one version, correcting it would become almost impossible. Shock deepened when a major newspaper appeared with the headline, "The Empty Chair." Beneath the banquet photograph, a detailed timeline showed that Meghan's place card had been replaced shortly before the doors opened. The front page changed the debate. The question was no longer simply why Anne left. It was who had moved the card, who knew, and why no one stopped it. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered as broadcasters delivered updates. Then Anne's written clarification, provided through an official recorded statement, was read aloud. Meghan had not asked her to leave, and her objection concerned the handling of the seating arrangement. The words did not erase the humiliation, but they stopped blame from settling entirely on one woman. Charles understood what came next. With Anne refusing to let Meghan carry the full burden, the king approved a final statement accepting responsibility and announcing consequences for the official behind the decision. The public had seen the fracture, but the monarchy's final judgment would depend on whether Charles could turn an evening of humiliation into an honest act of accountability. Anne's walkout initially appeared to be an act of rejection, one royal woman refusing to share the center with another. But the full truth revealed something more painful and more important. The Banquet crisis was created by hidden decisions, careless authority, and years of unresolved resentment. By the end, the empty chair no longer symbolized division alone. It became the moment the monarchy was forced to stop pretending. Charles issued a direct palace statement before another false version of the night could take hold. The king confirmed that the seating change had been authorized as part of a reconciliation gesture, but admitted it had been carried out without proper consultation with the senior royals affected. A palace statement is an official public message released in the monarch's name, and this one mattered because it placed responsibility inside the household, instead of leaving Meghan or Anne to carry the blame alone. Consequences followed quickly. The senior official who altered the arrangement was removed from ceremonial planning duties, and new rules demanded written approval for final seating plans. No vague instruction could again be stretched into a decision carrying such public weight. The monarchy had learned, painfully, that symbolism without clarity could become a weapon. Charles then met Anne privately. According to a documented account preserved by a trusted aide, he admitted that his desire to manufacture a visible display of unity had placed his sister in an impossible position. She accepted his regret, but her answer remained firm. Unity, she told him, could not be staged through surprise. The king understood that reconciliation imposed from above was not reconciliation at all. Meghan released a restrained, recorded response of her own. She acknowledged that she should have questioned the placement when she sensed the discomfort around her. Yet she refused to apologize for believing the offer of peace had been sincere. Her words carried neither triumph nor defeat. They exposed how easily hope could be turned into humiliation. Anne fulfilled her promise soon after. Through an official written clarification, she stated that Meghan had not stolen the seat, ordered the alteration, or forced her from the hall. That single intervention stopped the harshest accusation before it became accepted history. Catherine later arranged a smaller family dinner, without cameras, ceremonial rank, or carefully engineered symbolism. Anne and Meghan were seated at equal distance from the center, not as a performance, but as a quiet recognition of boundaries. No one pretended the pain had vanished, yet no one allowed it to control the room. The final verdict was clear. Anne had not walked away from duty. She had demanded that duty retain meaning. Meghan had not won or lost. Her refusal to move exposed how deeply dignity and belonging had become entangled. Charles prevented lasting rupture only by accepting responsibility. The banquet began with a chair being moved and ended with the monarchy confronting a truth it could no longer conceal. Respect cannot be created through seating plans. Unity cannot be commanded, and reconciliation means nothing unless every person at the table understands why they are there. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.